Jason Chen was always the kind of student who worked twice as hard as everyone else. At 23, his dark eyes carried the weight of someone much older. His shoulders often hunched from long hours bent over textbooks in the university library. The son of immigrants who had sacrificed everything for his education, Jason felt the pressure of their expectations daily. His small apartment, with its leaking faucet and temperamental heater, was filled with second-hand furniture and stacks of highlighted textbooks. When the letter came announcing his scholarship had been cut due to budget constraints, Jason read it 3 times, hoping the words might somehow rearrange themselves. They didn't. That same week, his university announced a tuition hike, and his boss at the campus coffee shop reduced his hours. The perfect storm of financial disaster left him with exactly $18 in his bank account and rent due in 2 weeks. "You've got until Friday," his landlord had told him that morning. Not unkindly, but firmly. "After that, I'll need to find someone who can pay." That evening, Jason was working an extra shift at a university donor gala, serving champagne to people who spent more on a single meal than he made in a month. His white server's jacket was too big, borrowed from a co-worker, and he tugged at the sleeves nervously as he balanced a tray of glasses. "You look like you could use one of these yourself," said a voice, elegant and amused. Jason turned to find an elderly woman watching him with sharp blue eyes. Unlike many of the other donors who looked through the servers as if they were invisible, she was looking directly at him, a half smile playing on her lips. Her silver hair was styled in a sophisticated bob, and despite her age, somewhere in her 70s, Jason guessed, she stood straight-backed and confident. "I'm afraid I'm on duty, ma'am," Jason replied, offering a polite smile. "Eleanor Blackwood," she said, extending a hand adorned with a single stunning emerald ring. "And you are?" "Jason Chen, ma'am." "Are you a student here, Jason Chen?" she asked, taking a champagne flute from his tray. "Yes, ma'am. Double major in economics and international development." "Ambitious," Eleanor remarked. "And what do you plan to do with these impressive degrees?" Something about her direct manner made Jason answer honestly. "I was hoping to work in microfinance, helping set up sustainable programs in developing regions. But honestly, at this point, I'll be lucky if I can stay enrolled through the semester." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Financial troubles?" Jason immediately regretted his candor. "I'm sorry, that was unprofessional. Can I get you anything else, Mrs. Blackwood?" "It's Miss Blackwood, actually. And yes, you can join me for lunch tomorrow. I have a proposition that might interest you." She reached into a small clutch purse and extracted a business card, handing it to Jason. 1 o'clock. "Don't be late." Before Jason could protest, she moved away, greeting the university president with the ease of old friendship. The next day, against his better judgment, Jason found himself at an upscale restaurant near the harbor. He'd worn his only suit, purchased secondhand for interviews, and was acutely aware of how it strained slightly at the shoulders. Eleanor was already seated, reviewing a document through elegant reading glasses. She looked up as he approached and gestured to the chair across from her. Punctual. "I appreciate that," she said by way of greeting. Their lunch conversation was surprisingly easy. Eleanor was sharp-witted and well-traveled, asking Jason insightful questions about his studies and his family. She spoke of her late husband, a brief marriage in her youth that ended when he passed away from heart disease, and her subsequent decision to focus on her career in real estate development. "I've built something significant," she said, "but at 71, I find myself with more wealth than time and no one to leave it to." After their meal, as they sipped coffee, Eleanor placed a small folder on the table between them. "I've had my eye on several promising students at the university," she explained. "I've been looking for someone specific, someone intelligent, hardworking, and principled, but also someone in need of immediate financial assistance." Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Blackwood, if you're offering charity, I'm offering a transaction," she cut in. "One that would benefit us both." She opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be a legal document. "I am proposing marriage, Jason." Jason choked on his coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "A marriage of convenience," Eleanor continued calmly as if discussing the weather. "You would have your debts paid, your education funded, and a comfortable living allowance. In return, I would have companionship in my final years and the assurance that my estate will eventually be managed by someone with both intelligence and social conscience." Jason stared at her, certain this was an elaborate joke. But Eleanor Blackwood's expression remained serious. "Why me?" he finally asked. "There must be hundreds of students who need financial help. I told you I've been watching several candidates. You have the right combination of intelligence and character. And frankly, you're the most desperate at the moment." Jason felt his face flush with embarrassment, but Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "There's no shame in hardship, young man. Only in how one responds to it." "This can't be legal," Jason protested. "It's perfectly legal. Unusual, certainly, but legal. My lawyer has drawn up the necessary paperwork, including a prenuptial agreement that protects certain assets." She tapped the folder. "Take this, read it. Think about it, but don't think too long. Your landlord's deadline is approaching, isn't it?" That night, Jason sat on his threadbare couch, the folder open before him. The prenuptial agreement stipulated that while Eleanor would provide immediate financial support, Jason would not have access to her full estate until after 5 years of marriage. There were clauses about mutual respect and consideration, but nothing about love or physical expectations. It was, as Eleanor had said, a transaction. For 3 days, Jason barely slept. He applied for emergency loans, called distant relatives, even considered dropping out for a semester to work full-time. But all paths led to the same dead end. On the morning he was supposed to vacate his apartment, he called the number on Eleanor's business card. The wedding took place in a judge's chambers the following Monday. Jason wore his interview suit. Eleanor wore a cream-colored pantsuit and the emerald ring. Her lawyer and personal assistant served as witnesses. There were no vows about love, only legal declarations. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Jason felt as if he were watching someone else's life unfold. "Shall we go home?" Eleanor asked afterward, linking her arm through his with surprising firmness. Home turned out to be a sprawling mansion overlooking the bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a staff of 3, a housekeeper, a cook and Eleanor's personal assistant, a brisk woman named Rita, who regarded Jason with undisguised suspicion. "Your suite is in the East Wing," Eleanor informed him as a uniformed housekeeper took his single suitcase. "I've taken the liberty of ordering you some appropriate clothing. Rita will show you around and explain the household routines." As Eleanor walked away, Rita stepped closer to Jason. "This way, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clipped. "And a word of advice, don't get too comfortable. You're the 5th, you know." "The 5th what?" Jason asked, bewildered. Rita's expression remained neutral. "The 5th Mr. Blackwood, of course." Then, seeing his confusion, she added, "Oh, she didn't mention the others? How interesting." Before Jason could question her further, Rita turned and walked briskly down a corridor, leaving him no choice but to follow, his mind racing with questions about what exactly he had gotten himself into. The first night in Eleanor's mansion felt like sleeping in a museum. Jason's suite was larger than his entire apartment had been, with a bedroom that opened onto a private balcony overlooking manicured gardens. The closet had been filled with clothes in his size, designer shirts with tags still attached, tailored pants, and even shoes that fit perfectly. It was unsettling how much Eleanor knew about him, down to his shoe size. Sleep didn't come easily. Jason lay awake, staring at the ornate ceiling, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. The mansion creaked and settled around him, every sound unfamiliar and slightly threatening. At breakfast the next morning, Eleanor sat at the head of a table long enough for 12, reading a financial newspaper while sipping black coffee. She looked up when Jason entered, hesitant and uncomfortable in new clothes that felt like a costume. "There you are," she said briskly. "Sleep well?" "Not really," Jason admitted, taking a seat 2 chairs away from her. "You'll adjust," Eleanor said, returning to her newspaper. "Most people do." The cook appeared silently, placing a plate of eggs and toast before Jason. "Thank you," he said, earning a surprised look from the woman. "What would you like to do today?" Eleanor asked, setting down her paper. "I've arranged for your things to be moved from your apartment. Your landlord was quite relieved when the remaining rent was paid." Jason felt a flush of embarrassment. "I can move my own things." "Already done," Eleanor said dismissively. "Rita has also arranged for your university bills to be paid in full through graduation. You'll find a credit card in your name on your dresser. Use it as needed." The casual way she dispensed with problems that had been crushing him just days ago left Jason speechless. He pushed his eggs around the plate, appetite gone. I have meetings until 4, Eleanor continued, seemingly unaware of his discomfort. Perhaps you'd like to visit the campus with your new financial freedom. Or explore the house. There's a pool behind the east gardens and a library in the west wing. Jason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Everything was happening too fast. After Eleanor left, Jason wandered through the mansion feeling like an intruder. The place was a labyrinth of rooms, each more expensively furnished than the last. Original artworks hung on walls, and glass cases displayed artifacts that belonged in museums. In one room, he found photographs of Eleanor through the decades, receiving awards, shaking hands with politicians, standing proudly before skyscrapers bearing the Blackwood name. There were no family photos, no children or grandchildren. Just Eleanor, always elegantly dressed, always alone in her success. She built it all herself. You know, came Rita's voice from behind him, making him jump. You shouldn't sneak up on people, Jason said, heart racing. Rita's thin lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. Forgive me. I'm used to moving quietly in this house. Jason gestured to the photos. She never had children? No, Rita said simply. Her work was her life. Until recently. What changed recently? Rita studied him for a long moment before answering. She started collecting husbands. Jason's stomach tightened. What happened to the others? They didn't work out, Rita said vaguely. Eleanor is particular about what she wants. The first one tried to access her accounts within a week. The second brought friends to the house without permission. The third was only interested in partying with her money. She tilted her head. The fourth was the longest, almost 3 months. He seemed promising until Eleanor caught him trying to photograph financial documents in her study. And they were all young, like me, all struggling students, Rita confirmed. All handsome, bright young men with financial troubles. Jason felt sick. So this is some kind of game to her? Picking up desperate students and seeing if they measure up? Rita's expression hardened. Eleanor Blackwood doesn't play games, Mr. Chen. Whatever her reasons, they're serious. I suggest you remember that. Throughout the day, Jason discovered locked doors throughout the mansion, Eleanor's study, a room Rita called the vault, and a small building detached from the main house. When he asked the housekeeper about these, she simply said they were Ms. Blackwood's private areas and hurried away. That evening, Eleanor hosted a dinner party for 6 business associates. She introduced Jason simply as my husband, offering no explanation for their unlikely match. The guests, all in their 60s or older, barely concealed their curiosity, but were too well-mannered to ask direct questions. Jason sat silently through 5 courses, watching Eleanor transform into a different person. Charming, witty, commanding attention with anecdotes and sharp observations about market trends. These people respected her, Jason realized. Perhaps even feared her a little. After the guests left, Eleanor found Jason in the library, nursing a glass of whiskey. You were quiet tonight, she observed, pouring herself a small glass from the same crystal decanter. What am I supposed to say? Jason asked. They all know this marriage is a sham. Eleanor settled into a leather chair across from him. They suspect, but they don't know. People will believe almost anything if you project enough confidence. Is that how you built your empire? Confidence? Partly, she agreed. Along with intelligence, timing, and absolute ruthlessness when necessary. She sipped her drink. You disapprove. I don't know enough to disapprove, Jason said honestly. I just know that I'm living in a stranger's house wearing a stranger's clothes pretending to be something I'm not. Give it time, Eleanor advised. The clothes will become yours. The house will become familiar. As for the marriage, she shrugged elegantly. It's a contract, nothing more. Rita told me about the others, Jason said suddenly. Something flashed in Eleanor's eyes. Anger, perhaps, or disappointment. Rita talks too much. Why didn't they work out? They wanted different things than I was offering, Eleanor said simply. And what exactly are you offering me? Jason pressed. Besides money, Eleanor set down her glass. An opportunity, Jason. One that will become clear in time. The days fell into a pattern. Jason attended his classes, now free from financial worry. Eleanor worked from her study, taking meetings and phone calls. They ate dinner together most evenings, discussing world events or Jason's studies. Sometimes Eleanor would recount stories from her career, buildings she'd developed, deals she'd negotiated, competitors she'd outmaneuvered. Jason found himself reluctantly admiring her. She was formidable, yes, but also unexpectedly funny, and genuinely interested in his ideas about microfinance and sustainable development. On the fifth night, Jason woke to the sound of voices downstairs. Checking the clock, 3:14 a.m., he slipped out of bed and followed the noise to the main staircase. Eleanor stood in the foyer with a man in a dark suit, speaking in hushed tones. Medical terms floated up the stairs. Treatment options. Progression. Palliative care. "I won't spend my last days in a hospital," Eleanor was saying firmly. "The treatment could buy you more time," the man, clearly a doctor, insisted. "Time bedridden and miserable is not what I need," Eleanor replied. "I need enough time to finish what I've started." "How long without treatment?" The doctor sighed heavily. "A month, maybe less." Jason froze on the stairs. "A month? Less?" What was wrong with Eleanor? "That should be sufficient," Eleanor said with the same tone she used when concluding business discussions. "Thank you for coming at this hour." After the doctor left, Eleanor remained in the foyer, staring at the closed door. For the first time, Jason saw her shoulders slump, her confident posture faltering. She looked suddenly older, vulnerable in a way he hadn't thought possible. He retreated silently to his room, mind racing. Eleanor was ill, dying from the sound of it. And she had perhaps a month to live. What did that mean for their arrangement, for him? The next morning, Eleanor appeared at breakfast as composed as ever, showing no sign of the night's revelation. Jason studied her carefully, noticing now the careful application of makeup that hid her pallor, the slight tremor in her hand as she lifted her coffee cup. "Is everything okay?" he asked cautiously. Eleanor's eyes met his, sharp and assessing. "Did you need something specific today? More money, perhaps?" "No," Jason said, taken aback by her coldness. You seem tired." "I'm 71, Jason. Tiredness comes with the territory." She set down her cup with deliberate precision. "I have something to show you tomorrow. Be ready at 9. We'll be going into the city." "What is it?" Jason asked. Eleanor rose from the table, smoothing her impeccable suit. "The reason I married you," she said simply, and walked away. That night, Jason couldn't sleep again. He wandered the dark mansion, finding himself drawn to the photographs of Eleanor in her prime, commanding, confident, unstoppable. Now she was dying, and for some reason she had chosen him to what? What exactly did she want from him? On the 6th day of their bizarre marriage, Jason stood by the front door at 9 o'clock sharp, waiting for whatever revelation Eleanor had promised. The sleek black car glided through morning traffic, its tinted windows separating Jason and Eleanor from the bustle of the city. Eleanor sat beside him, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, her silver hair styled perfectly. If Jason hadn't overheard the doctor's late-night visit, he would never have guessed she was ill. Her posture remained straight, her gaze steady as she watched the city pass by. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" Jason asked, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the mansion. Eleanor's lips curved in a slight smile. "Patience was never my strong suit either," she said. "We're going to meet my financial team." "Your financial team," Jason repeated. "Why do I need to meet them?" "All in good time," Eleanor replied, turning her attention back to the window. The car pulled up to a modern glass building downtown. Unlike the flashy skyscrapers bearing the Blackwood name, this building was understated, almost anonymous. The driver opened Eleanor's door, and Jason followed her through a discreet entrance where a security guard nodded respectfully. "Good morning." "Ms. Blackwood," the guard said. "Good morning." "Henry," Eleanor replied with familiar ease. "This is my husband, Jason Chen." The guard didn't bat an eye at the introduction, making Jason wonder just how many husbands he had seen Eleanor bring through these doors. They took a private elevator to the top floor, where a receptionist immediately ushered them into a conference room. Two people were waiting, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind stylish glasses, and an older man with a neatly trimmed white beard. "Jason, this is Vivian Zhao, my chief financial officer, and Robert Keller."
"My attorney," Eleanor said.
"Vivian, Robert, meet Jason Chen." Handshakes were exchanged, Vivian's grip particularly firm as she assessed Jason with undisguised curiosity. "Please, sit." Eleanor directed Jason to a chair before turning to her advisors. "Show him everything." "Everything?" Robert asked, raising an eyebrow. Everything, Eleanor confirmed. I'll be back in an hour. With that, she turned and left the room, the door closing behind her with a soft click. Jason looked between Vivian and Robert, confusion evident on his face. What's going on? Vivian opened a laptop while Robert placed a thick folder on the table. Mr. Chen, Vivian began, how much do you know? About Eleanor's financial situation? Jason shrugged. She's wealthy. Real estate development mainly. Vivian and Robert exchanged glances. That's the simplified version, Vivian said, turning the laptop to face Jason. This is the reality. On the screen was a spreadsheet with numbers that made Jason's eyes widen. Assets, holdings, investments. Billions, not millions, as he had assumed. Properties across 3 continents. Controlling interests in companies he recognized from the news. Charitable foundations. Offshore accounts. This can't be right, Jason said, leaning forward to study the screen. This would make her one of the richest people in the country. The 14th richest, to be exact, Robert confirmed. Eleanor has always valued her privacy. The public knows about her real estate empire, but that's merely the visible portion of her wealth. She built it from nothing, Vivian added, a note of admiration in her voice. Started with a small inheritance from her husband, turned it into a development company, then diversified. Every investment was strategic, every acquisition carefully planned. Jason sat back overwhelmed. Why are you showing me this? Robert opened the folder and removed several documents. Because as Eleanor's husband, you are now integral to her estate planning. Estate planning? Jason echoed, the doctor's words from the night before echoing in his mind. A month, maybe less. Eleanor has terminal pancreatic cancer, Robert said quietly. She was diagnosed 6 months ago. Despite having overheard this information, hearing it stated so plainly still felt like a physical blow to Jason. She never said anything. Eleanor doesn't discuss weakness, Vivian said simply. Not even her own mortality. Robert placed a document before Jason. This is the real reason she married you. Not for the prenuptial protections, but the drive back to the mansion was silent. Eleanor sat beside Jason, her face unreadable as she gazed out the window. The thick folder from Robert rested on Jason's lap, heavier with responsibility than actual paper. You should have told me, Jason finally said as the city gave way to the winding coastal road that led to Eleanor's estate. Would you have believed me? Eleanor asked, not turning from the window. Or would you have thought it was a trick, a test to see if you'd stay with a dying woman for money? Jason had no answer for that. The documents in the folder had explained everything with brutal clarity. Eleanor had months, not years, to prepare her legacy. The foundation she wanted Jason to oversee would fund education for thousands of students, facing the same desperate circumstances he had known. The marriage wasn't just about getting her money to the right place, it was about finding someone who understood what that money could mean to people who had nothing. Why me? He asked. After all those others failed your tests, why pick me? Eleanor finally turned to look at him, her blue eyes sharp despite her illness. Because you thanked the cook for breakfast, she said simply. Because when I offered you financial salvation, your first concern was whether it was charity. Pride, even in desperation. That's rare. The car pulled through the mansion gates, crunching gravel as it circled the fountain in front of the main entrance. You don't have to decide right now, Eleanor said as the driver opened her door. Take a few days. Think it through. That night Jason couldn't sleep. He paced the balcony of his suite, the weight of Eleanor's revelation pressing down on him. The foundation would be enormous, billions in assets dedicated to educational opportunities worldwide. Eleanor wanted him to lead it, to find worthy recipients to ensure her fortune changed lives rather than sitting in bank accounts. It was everything he had ever wanted to do, handed to him on a silver platter because he'd been desperate enough to marry a stranger. The irony wasn't lost on him. Around midnight, he noticed a light on in the garden. Looking down, he saw Eleanor sitting on a stone bench, wrapped in a cashmere throw despite the mild night. Without thinking, he made his way downstairs and outside. Trouble sleeping? He asked, approaching slowly. Eleanor didn't seem surprised to see him. Pain makes sleep difficult, she admitted. The first acknowledgement of her condition he'd heard from her. The medication helps, but then the dreams come. Jason sat beside her on the bench, leaving space between them. What do you dream about? Eleanor's laugh was soft and bitter. Missed opportunities. Different choices. The usual regrets of the dying. You built an empire, Jason said. What could you possibly regret? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, looking up at the stars. I was so focused on proving myself, on building something lasting, that I forgot to build a life alongside it. No children, no family. Just wealth and objects and influence. She gestured toward the mansion. And now I leave it all to a stranger because there's no one else. You have no family at all? A nephew in Boston. We haven't spoken in 20 years. He'll contest the will, of course, but Robert is very good at his job. Eleanor adjusted the throw around her shoulders. My parents died believing I'd wasted my life chasing money instead of finding a real husband and having children. And what do you believe? Jason asked. Eleanor's smile was sad. I believe I built something meaningful. I just wish I'd understood sooner that meaning isn't the same as purpose. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the distant sound of waves against the cliffs below the property. If you do this, Eleanor finally said, it won't be easy. People will question your right to oversee such vast resources. They'll doubt your abilities, your motives. The same nephew who ignored my existence for decades will suddenly become very interested in challenging my mental capacity when I wrote my will. Why not just set up the foundation now? While you're still, Jason trailed off, uncomfortable with mentioning her impending death directly. While I'm still coherent? Eleanor finished for him. Because foundations can be influenced, boards can be corrupted. I've seen it happen too many times. I need someone with both legal standing and personal commitment to protect what I've built. She turned to face him fully. I need an heir, Jason. Not just to my money, but to my purpose. The next morning, Jason found Eleanor in her study, the previously locked door now open to him. She sat behind an imposing desk reviewing documents with Rita. Both women looked up as he entered. I'll come back later, Jason said, starting to retreat. No, stay, Eleanor said, gesturing Rita away. We're finished here. Rita gathered the papers and left, giving Jason an unreadable look as she passed. Have you made your decision? Eleanor asked once they were alone. Jason approached the desk, taking in the room for the first time. Unlike the rest of the mansion's formal opulence, this space felt personal. Awards and photographs lined the walls, bookcases overflowed with well-read volumes, and architectural models of Blackwood buildings were displayed on side tables. I have questions first, he said, taking a seat across from her. Of course you do, Eleanor said with a hint of her usual sharpness. Ask them. The other four men, Jason began. What really happened to them? Eleanor leaned back in her chair. Exactly what Rita told you. They failed basic tests of character. The first demanded access to my accounts immediately. The second turned my home into a party house for his friends. The third was caught stealing artwork. The fourth, she paused, something like disappointment crossing her face. The fourth I actually liked. Smart, charming. He seemed to understand what I was offering. Then I found him photographing my private financial documents. How did you find me? I asked the University Financial Aid Office for a list of students who'd recently lost scholarships. I reviewed your academic record, your extracurricular activities, your employment history. You worked harder than anyone else on that list. Jason shook his head, still struggling to comprehend the scale of her planning. You've thought of everything. Not everything, Eleanor countered. I didn't anticipate how quickly the cancer would progress. I'd hoped for more time to prepare you. For what happens after you're gone, Jason said quietly. Eleanor nodded. The first year will be the hardest. The foundation's launch will draw attention. Your youth will invite scrutiny, but Vivian and Robert will stand with you, and the board I've selected is beyond reproach. Jason stood and walked to the window, looking out over the property that stretched toward the ocean. Somewhere in the distance was his old apartment, the life he'd nearly lost to poverty, and here was a chance not just to escape that life himself, but to help others do the same. If I say yes, he said slowly, I want something in return. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Beyond billions of dollars? I want to know you, Jason said, turning to face her. Not just Eleanor Blackwood, the businesswoman, or Eleanor Blackwood, the philanthropist. I want to know the person behind all this. The woman with regrets about missed opportunities. If I'm going to carry forward your legacy, I need to understand who you really are. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, surprise, and something like respect crossing her face. "That's not what I expected you to ask for." "I'm not what you expected," Jason said. "That's why I'm still here, isn't it?" A small smile tugged at Eleanor's lips. "Fair enough, Mr. Chen. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Jason said. "Starting with what made you decide to build all this in the first place. Not the business story you tell at dinner parties, but the real reason." For the first time since he'd met her, Eleanor looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with her illness. "That's a long story," she said softly. Jason returned to the chair across from her desk. "I have time," he said. "You're the one who doesn't." The bluntness of his statement hung in the air between them. Then Eleanor laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her face, making her look years younger. "Well played," she said, closing the folder on her desk. "Very well, Jason. You want the truth? Let's start at the beginning." She settled back in her chair. "I was born poor in a small town where girls were expected to marry young and raise families. My father was a drunk who believed education was wasted on daughters." As Eleanor spoke, Jason watched her carefully, seeing glimpses of the young woman she had been, fighting against expectations and limitations. He realized he was being given a rare gift, the true story behind the legend she had become. And in that moment, he made his decision about the future she was offering him. The weeks that followed changed everything between Jason and Eleanor. Each evening after dinner, they would retreat to her study where she shared stories from her life. Not the polished versions she told at business functions, but raw, honest accounts of her struggles and triumphs. She told him about growing up in a small coal mining town, where her father drank away his paychecks and her mother took in laundry to feed the family, how she'd worked as a waitress to put herself through community college, facing harassment and disrespect daily. The early days of her career when male colleagues took credit for her ideas and clients refused to meet with a girl. The strategic marriage to her late husband, a kind but sickly older man who saw her potential and left her his modest savings when he died just 3 years after their wedding, didn't love him romantically. Eleanor admitted one night as they sat before the fireplace in her study, "But I respected him deeply. He was the first person who ever truly believed in me." Jason found himself sharing too, about his immigrant parents who worked multiple jobs to give him opportunities they never had, about the pressure he felt to succeed, about his dreams for helping communities like the one his family came from. As the days passed, Eleanor grew visibly weaker. She tired more easily, ate less, and sometimes winced when she thought Jason wasn't looking. Yet she refused to discuss her declining health, focusing instead on preparing him for what was to come. She introduced him to key business associates, explaining that Jason would be overseeing her charitable endeavors. She took him to board meetings of companies where she held significant interests, quietly noting which executives could be trusted and which were merely opportunists. In the evenings, she walked him through complex financial statements, patiently explaining investment strategies she had developed over decades. "You don't need to understand every detail," she told him when he struggled with particularly complex offshore structures. "That's what Vivian is for. You need to understand the purpose behind it all." 20 days after their wedding, Eleanor collapsed while walking in the garden. Jason carried her inside, surprised at how light she felt in his arms, how fragile her frame had become beneath the expensive clothes that now hung loosely on her body. She refused to go to the hospital. "I've made my peace with how this ends," she said firmly when the doctor arrived. "No heroic measures, no hospitals. I die in my own home with my dignity intact." That night after the doctor left, Jason helped Eleanor to bed for the first time. Her bedroom was surprisingly simple compared to the rest of the house, elegant but comfortable, with photographs on the nightstand that he hadn't seen displayed elsewhere. A young Eleanor with an older man he assumed was her husband. Eleanor breaking ground on her first building project. Eleanor receiving an award from a women's business association. "They'll try to take it all from you," Eleanor said suddenly as Jason adjusted her pillows. "My nephew, certain board members, even some of the charities I've supported over the years. They'll say I wasn't of sound mind, that you manipulated me, that the foundation is contrary to my established pattern of giving. Robert has prepared me for that," Jason assured her. "The legal documentation is solid." "It's not just legal battles," Eleanor insisted, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. It's the whispers, the rumors, the subtle undermining of your authority. They'll say you were my boy toy, my final foolish indulgence. Jason couldn't help but smile at that. Nobody who spent 5 minutes with you would believe you'd tolerate a boy toy. A ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's face. True, still, perception matters in the circles you'll be moving in now. Her expression grew serious again. You need to be above reproach. Smarter, more prepared, more dignified than anyone else in the room. They'll be waiting for you to fail. I won't fail, Jason promised. Not after everything you've done to prepare me. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment. No, she said finally. I don't believe you will. The next morning, Jason woke to find Rita standing in his doorway, her usually composed face showing signs of stress. She's asking for you, Rita said simply. Jason found Eleanor in her study rather than her bedroom. She sat in her wheelchair by the window overlooking the ocean, a blanket across her lap despite the warm morning. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, yet her eyes were as sharp as ever when she turned to him. Good. You're here, she said, gesturing to the chair beside her. We have matters to discuss. Shouldn't you be resting? Jason asked, taking the seat. Eleanor dismissed this with a wave of her hand. I'll be resting permanently soon enough. Sit, listen. For the next hour, she spoke without interruption, giving him final instructions on matters they hadn't yet covered. Which charities to continue supporting, which executives might try to challenge the foundation's direction, which properties held sentimental value beyond their monetary worth. The house in Provence, she said. Keep that one. It's small by my current standards, but it was my first real purchase after my business took off. I was so proud to sign those papers. A rare look of nostalgia crossed her face before she continued with her instructions. When she finally fell silent, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders, Jason leaned forward. Why did you really choose me, Eleanor? The truth. Eleanor was quiet for so long that Jason thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. Because you looked at me, she said, not at my money or my power or my age. That first night at the gala when I spoke to you, you actually saw me. Do you know how rare that is when you're rich? When you're old? When you're a woman who spent her life in a man's world? She shook her head slightly. People look at what I represent, what I can do for them. You just looked at me. 3 days later, Eleanor's condition deteriorated rapidly. The doctor came and went, speaking in hushed tones with Rita about pain management and comfort measures. Jason barely left Eleanor's side, reading to her when she was awake, sitting quietly when she slept. On what would be their final evening together, Eleanor was lucid, almost energetic in a way that Jason had learned often preceded a decline. She insisted on being moved to her study rather than remaining in bed. I've spent my life working, she said as Rita and Jason carefully helped her into her chair. I'm not spending my last hours staring at a bedroom ceiling. Once settled at her desk, Eleanor asked Rita to bring a specific box from the safe. When they were alone, she pushed the ornate wooden box toward Jason. Open it, she instructed. Inside, Jason found a collection of items that seemed oddly personal for someone as private as Eleanor. A tarnished waitress name tag, a small piece of brick, a faded photograph of a young girl standing before a dilapidated house, and an old mechanical watch. My first job, Eleanor explained, pointing to the name tag. A brick from my first development project, the house I grew up in, and my husband's watch. She touched each item gently, reminders of where I came from and how far I've traveled. Why are you showing me these? Because success isn't about the mansions or the money or the power, Eleanor said quietly. It's about remembering why you started the journey in the first place. These kept me honest when everything around me pushed toward excess and disconnection. She closed the box carefully and pushed it toward him. They're yours now. Add your own reminders as you go. Never forget where you started, Jason. Eleanor died peacefully 3 days later, with Jason holding her hand and Rita standing vigil nearby. Her last words were practical, true to her nature. Remember, the codicil to the will is in the second safe. Robert has the combination. The funeral was small but drew significant media attention due to Eleanor's wealth and the unexpected appearance of her young husband. Jason stood stoic beside Robert and Vivian, as distant business associates and curious socialites paid their respects to a woman few had truly known. Eleanor's nephew appeared as predicted, approaching Jason at the reception with barely concealed hostility. "This isn't over," he hissed, keeping a pleasant smile fixed on his face for the benefit of onlookers. "My aunt was not in her right mind. No court will uphold this farce of a marriage or the ridiculous foundation she created." Jason met the man's gaze calmly. "Your aunt anticipated this conversation. She left something for you." He handed over an envelope that Eleanor had prepared weeks earlier. The nephew tore it open eagerly, likely expecting a settlement offer. Instead, he found a single page with Eleanor's distinctive handwriting. "Thomas, I remained of sound mind until the end, which is more than I can say for your character. You ignored my existence for 20 years until you caught wind of my illness. The foundation will stand. Challenge it, and Robert has instructions to release details of the embezzlement charges that I helped you settle quietly in 2018. Choose wisely, Eleanor." The color drained from Thomas's face as he crumpled the note and walked away without another word. 3 years later, Jason stood on the stage of a university auditorium, watching as the first class of Blackwood Foundation scholars received their diplomas. 50 students who, like him, had faced financial barriers to education, now graduating debt-free with support for graduate studies or career placement. As he shook each graduate's hand, he saw Eleanor in their determined faces, the same drive, the same hunger to prove themselves, the same refusal to be limited by circumstance. That evening, Jason returned to what was now his office in Eleanor's former study. The room remained largely as she had left it, though now photographs of foundation events and successful scholars shared wall space with Eleanor's achievements. He opened the wooden box she had given him on their last night together, now containing his own additions, his old student ID, the key to his former apartment, and the plain gold band from their courthouse wedding. "We did it, Eleanor," he said to the empty room. "The first class is launched. 50 more start next semester." Outside the window, the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant orange and gold. Jason thought about the frightened, desperate student he had been just a few years ago, and the man he had become, not just wealthy, but purposeful. Not just Eleanor's heir, but the custodian of her vision for changing lives. What had begun as a marriage of desperate convenience had become something neither of them could have predicted. A true partnership that transcended Eleanor's death, continuing to transform lives long after she was gone.